Every time you open your mouth, you leave fingerprints on the glass, not just on the conversation, on your reputation, on your next move, on how people will treat you from this moment forward. Because the world isn't listening to you the way you think it is. Most people aren't listening for truth. They're listening for leverage. They're listening for your pressure points, your insecurities, the places where your ego twitches, the places where your fear leaks out through just explaining, the places where your ambition shows its teeth. And the moment you speak too freely, you give them a map. You think talking makes you powerful because it feels like control. But a lot of the time, it's the opposite. It's exposure disguised as confidence. It's a light turned on inside your head. Machiavelli didn't admire charm. He admired command, and command begins with one brutal skill most people never master: the ability to stay silent without shrinking. Not quiet because you have nothing. Quiet because you understand the price of being understood too quickly. Because in a world addicted to noise, everyone talking, everyone explaining, everyone proving, they can't ignore the one person who doesn't rush to be seen. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is tactical invisibility. It's the cloak. It's the fog. It's the locked door that makes people knock harder. It's what turns you from another voice into a question mark. And question marks are dangerous because people hate uncertainty. They will try to solve you. They will start projecting onto you, filling the silence with their imagination. And their imagination is usually more intense than reality. That's why silence can create fear. Not because you're doing anything dramatic, but because you're refusing to give them a clean story. Now listen, this isn't passive. This isn't be quiet and hope you win. This is calculated, cold, disciplined silence. The kind that doesn't beg to be understood. The kind that doesn't defend itself. The kind that makes people feel like they're standing too close to something they can't measure. In this video, you're going to learn 9 situations where opening your mouth is surrender and staying silent is survival. And the first one is the most common trap on earth. When you're angry. Anger is the easiest emotion to exploit because anger is loud. Anger is fast. Anger is predictable. Your enemies don't need you to lose the fight. They just need you to lose your composure. Because the second you explode, raise your voice, send the text, make the threat, over-explain the point, you become readable. And once you're readable, you can be managed. That's why weak men erupt. They feel disrespected and they rush to prove they're not weak. But the rush is the weakness. A Machiavellian mind treats anger like a weapon with a safety lock. Not because anger is bad, because anger is valuable. And valuable things are protected, not spilled. Rage, when controlled, becomes fuel. It becomes focus. It becomes a forge. But rage, when spoken, becomes a confession. It becomes evidence. It becomes an invitation for the other person to steer you. So, the truly dangerous person isn't the one who yells. It's the one who gets disrespected, feels the heat rise, and still keeps their face calm because they're not reacting. They're deciding. Here's the core idea. Your mouth is the exit door for your power. When anger opens that door, your power leaves the room. But when you stay silent, something strange happens. You gain 2 things at once: clarity and control. Clarity, because you can see the situation without the fog of emotion. Control, because you can choose the response instead of being dragged into one. And in that silence, the other person starts to panic. Because most people expect anger to look like noise. They expect the argument, the justification, the emotional chaos, the predictable storm. But instead, they meet a cold void. No reaction, no explanation, no weakness to feed on. That silence doesn't say, "I didn't feel it." It says, "I felt it, and I'm still above you." It says, "You don't get to pull my strings." It says, "You just showed your hand. I'm still holding mine." And this is where the psychological shift happens. When you stay quiet in anger, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is terrifying. Not because you're threatening anyone, but because people can't calculate you. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you'll respond. They don't know if you've already decided something they haven't even imagined yet. That uncertainty becomes pressure, and pressure makes people reveal themselves. They start over-talking, over-justifying, backtracking, testing, trying to pull a reaction out of you just so they can understand what game they're in. And you give them nothing, because your silence isn't absence. It's a trap with velvet walls. Think of it like this. Most people treat anger like a wildfire, loud, obvious, consuming everything in its path. A strategist treats anger like a furnace, contained, controlled, used to shape steel. The wildfire burns you. The furnace builds you. So next time the fire rises in your chest, don't open your mouth. Close your lips. Open your eyes. Let your silence do the scouting. Let your stillness do the positioning. Because the person who talks in rage hands over the steering wheel. But the person who goes quiet keeps the keys. And that's where power begins. There is another moment where silence becomes lethal, not dramatic, not emotional, but deeply strategic. It's when you're winning. Because success changes how people look at you, quietly, invisibly, permanently. The moment you start rising financially, socially, professionally, the air around you shifts. Smiles linger a little too long. Compliments start carrying weight. Questions become probes, and curiosity turns into calculation. This is where most people make a fatal mistake. They talk. They celebrate out loud. They explain how they did it. They share the story too early, too clearly, too generously. They think visibility equals validation, and validation equals safety. It doesn't. Visibility invites targeting. Machiavelli understood this with terrifying clarity. The more obvious your victory, the more motivated your enemies become. Silence when you're ahead isn't humility, it's camouflage. Because when you speak about your wins, you don't just inform your allies. You awaken rivals who were previously asleep. You feed envy in people who hadn't noticed you yet. You give direction to resentment that didn't know where to aim. Why hand them a map? The man who wins loudly builds attention. The man who wins silently builds mystique. And mystique is far more dangerous than applause. Silence while winning does three critical things. First, it protects you. People can't attack what they can't clearly define. When your progress is quiet, your position becomes blurry. They don't know how strong you are, how far you've gone, or where you're headed next. That uncertainty slows them down. It forces hesitation, and hesitation is the space where you expand. Second, silence amplifies your presence. When you don't explain yourself, people start doing it for you. They whisper, they speculate, they fill in the gaps. And those gaps tend to make you look larger, smarter, more powerful than if you had explained everything yourself. You don't need to announce dominance. Silence lets others sense it. Third, silence keeps you hungry. Talking feeds ego. Celebration breeds comfort. Comfort dulls edge. The moment you start narrating your success is often the moment your evolution slows down. You start believing the story instead of sharpening the blade. Silence keeps you focused on the next move, not the last one. Think of it like this. A hunter doesn't celebrate after the first catch if the forest is still full of prey. He resets. He watches. He moves again. So when you're winning, say less. Let others underestimate you. Let them think it was luck. Let them assume you've peaked. Because the most devastating position is being ahead while being perceived as harmless. And if someone challenges you while you're ahead, don't argue. Don't justify. Don't explain. Silence is the loudest message. You're not competition. Now let's move into another dangerous situation, one that destroys people daily without them even noticing. Betrayal. When someone turns on you, your instincts scream for expression. You want answers, closure, an explanation, a confrontation. That instinct is emotional, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. Machiavelli would never waste words on a traitor. Why? Because betrayal is never an accident. It's a decision, and once that decision is made, your words cannot undo it. But your silence can do something far more powerful. When you go silent after betrayal, 3 brutal things happen. First, you deny them importance. Confrontation gives them relevance. It confirms they mattered enough to disrupt your emotional state. Silence erases them from the center of the story. It says, you were a chapter, not the book. Second, you trigger guilt and uncertainty. Words can be argued with. Silence can't. They replay the moment in their mind, over and over, wondering what you know, wondering what you're planning, wondering if you've already moved on, or if something is coming. That uncertainty eats at them far longer than anger ever could. Third, you preserve leverage. By saying nothing, you remain unreadable. They don't know if you're planning revenge or if you've completely detached. Either way, they've lost control of the narrative, and control is the only thing betrayers ever wanted. The man who screams after betrayal looks wounded. The man who smiles faintly and disappears? Terrifying. Because silence after betrayal communicates one thing with surgical precision: access revoked. No explanation. No drama. Just absence. And absence, when executed correctly, is psychological warfare. It forces them to feel the weight of what they lost without the comfort of your reaction. Machiavelli would advise this without hesitation. Never chase closure. Never beg for honesty. Never give someone the satisfaction of seeing your pain. Your silence is not forgiveness, it's superiority. It's the statement that you are already beyond the moment they're still trying to control. Now let's move to a subtler battlefield, one that decides power before conflict ever begins. Group settings. In every group, people talk to position themselves. They interrupt. They overshare. They perform intelligence. They compete for attention. Noise becomes currency. But the one who speaks the least, the one who watches, listens, and waits, that person becomes the axis of the room. Machiavelli understood this deeply. The man who listens controls information, and information is power. When everyone else is talking, they are revealing themselves, their ambitions, their insecurities, their alliances, their desperation, and you're collecting data. Silence turns you into a mirror. People project onto you. They start explaining themselves without being asked. They try to win your approval because they can't read you. Your quiet makes them uneasy, and unease shifts power. Because in a room full of noise, silence becomes a signal not of weakness, but of detachment. It tells the room, I don't need validation, I'm measuring. And when you finally speak briefly, precisely your words carry weight, because your silence already did the heavy lifting. The loud man searches for power. The quiet man lets power move toward him, and that distinction changes everything. There is a moment where silence becomes a crown, not because you're calm, not because you're kind, but because you refuse to step down. That moment is when you are attacked publicly, mocked, challenged, provoked in front of others. This is where most people lose the game instantly, not because the attack was strong, but because their ego was weak. Public attacks are never about truth. They are about positioning. Someone insults you in front of others because they want three things at once: your reaction, the crowd's attention, and a shift in status. If you respond emotionally, you give them all three. You validate them. You elevate them. You step into their frame. And the moment you defend yourself, you shrink. Machiavelli understood something brutal. Power is not proven by argument. It's proven by posture. A king does not explain himself to a clown. Silence in this moment is not avoidance. It is command. Because when you don't respond, something fascinating happens in the room. The focus shifts. Not to the attacker, but to you. People stop watching the one who spoke and start watching the one who didn't. Why is he so calm? Why isn't he reacting? Does he know something? Is he above this? Your silence becomes tension, and tension is power. The attacker keeps talking, trying to pull you down. Each word makes them look more desperate, more emotional, more obsessed, and the more still you remain, the higher you rise. You don't need to win the exchange. You need to win the perception. Words are bait in public confrontations. They are designed to hook your ego. Silence snaps the line. It communicates one message without ever stating it. You are beneath response. And that message hits harder than any insult ever could. Think of silence here like gravity. The more still you are, the more everything else falls around you. Now let's move into a situation where silence becomes a loaded weapon. When you know the truth and others don't. Especially when someone is lying, manipulating, or playing a double game. Most people feel an uncontrollable urge to expose what they know. They want to confront. They want to correct. They want to prove they're not foolish. That urge is emotional, and emotion is what gives away advantage. Machiavelli would never waste truth on confrontation. Why? Because truth spoken too early is mercy to your enemy. When people believe you don't know, they become careless. They lie again. They exaggerate. They grow confident. They dig deeper. Your silence gives them rope. And rope, when handled patiently, becomes a noose. When you stay silent while holding information, three powerful things happen. First, you retain control of timing. The element of surprise belongs to whoever speaks last, not first. Second, their mistakes compound. Each lie stacks on the previous one. Each manipulation leaves more evidence. Each move tightens their own trap. Third, you remain unreadable. They don't know if you're planning something or if you're simply observing. That uncertainty makes them reckless, and recklessness is fatal. Machiavelli's principle was simple. Never interrupt an enemy while he is making a mistake. Truth is most powerful when it is delivered at the exact moment it collapses their position completely. Too early, and you warn them. Too emotional, and you lose authority. But silent patience? That buries them with their own actions. Your silence here is not ignorance. It is a delayed execution. Now let's step into another arena where most people destroy themselves without realizing it. The presence of power. When you are around someone with higher status, wealth, influence, or authority, most people start performing. They talk too much. They overshare. They try to prove worth. They rush to impress. And in doing so, they make themselves small, not because they lack value, but because they leaked it. Machiavelli would never flatter power. He would study it. Because real influence is not earned through noise. It's earned through restraint. Silence in the presence of power is armor. It signals discipline. It signals self-respect. It signals that you are not desperate for approval. Power does not respect neediness. Power respects control. When you speak only when necessary, your words gain weight. You are not trying to be heard. You are choosing when to be heard. And that choice creates intrigue. They begin to wonder, what is he thinking? What does he know? Why isn't he trying? And that flips the dynamic. The moment you stop chasing validation, you create quiet authority. Loose words near power are dangerous. They reveal ambition. They expose insecurity. They kill mystery. But the man who stays silent, who listens, observes, and speaks sparingly, becomes unreadable. And unreadable people are feared, respected, and remembered. Now we enter one of the most critical zones of all. When you are being watched. Enemies, allies, the public. When eyes are on you, every word becomes ammunition. Every reaction is analyzed. Every sentence archived. Every explanation dissected. This is where most people collapse. They over-explain. They justify. They clarify. They become visible. Machiavelli knew this. The watched man must become unreadable. Not through lies, through silence. Silence under observation creates paranoia. People cannot tell if you are planning, hiding, or simply unbothered. And uncertainty breeds fear. Fear creates distance. Distance creates safety. Your silence becomes a shield behind which your real power grows. They project onto you. They overthink. They assume strength where they cannot find weakness. If you must be watched, give them shadows, not substance. Starve curiosity. Because the more they watch and get nothing, the more frustrated they become. They start exposing themselves. And while they're trying to decode you, you're already positioning for the next move. Say less. Do less. Reveal nothing. The watched man who stays silent becomes a myth. And myths are untouchable. There is one question that sounds harmless, but has destroyed more plans than failure ever has. What are you working on next? People ask it casually. Friends, colleagues, family, sometimes even strangers. But understand this clearly. Every question about your future is an attempt to map your mind. The moment people know what you're building, they can prepare for it, interfere with it, undermine it, copy it, or quietly position themselves in your path. Machiavelli would never hand over his blueprint, because visibility invites interference. And early exposure kills momentum. Most people mistake sharing plans for building trust. But trust is not built through disclosure. It's built through consistency and outcomes. When you speak too much about what's coming, you lose three things at once: freedom, protection, unpredictability, silence. Here is not secrecy. It is insulation. When no one knows what you're doing, you can pivot without explanation. You can change direction without resistance. You can adapt without being boxed in by expectations. The fewer people who know your intentions, the fewer people can sabotage them. Jealousy rarely looks like hate. It often wears the mask of concern. Advice. Curiosity. That's why Machiavellian silence doesn't announce intention. It reveals results. Unpredictable people are difficult to control, and control is what others want when they ask about your future. So, when pressed, don't reveal anything real. Smile, deflect, speak in fog. I've got a few things in motion. I like to move quietly. Let them guess. Because a man with a known plan is a man with a known weakness. Now let's step back and look at the pattern forming beneath all these moments. Anger, winning, betrayal, public attacks, truth, power, observation, future plans, different situations. Same principle. Silence is not the absence of action, it is the concealment of action. The average man speaks to relieve pressure. The strategic man stays silent to build leverage. That leverage is time. Time to observe. Time to decide. Time to let others expose themselves. In every one of these moments, the person who talks too soon loses altitude. They descend into reaction. They surrender narrative. They reveal their position. Silence keeps you elevated. Think of silence as altitude in warfare. The higher you are, the more you can see. The lower you go, the less control you have. Now understand this clearly: silence is not weakness. Weakness is being unable to stay silent. Weakness is emotional leakage. Weakness is compulsive explanation. Weakness is needing to be understood immediately. Strength is restraint. Strength is letting misunderstanding exist while you move quietly underneath it. Strength is allowing others to underestimate you while you sharpen your edge. This is why the loud are rarely feared. They show their hand. They broadcast emotion. They react. But the silent man? He is feared because no one knows what he's thinking. No one knows when he'll act. No one knows if they've already lost. Silence makes your eventual words lethal, because when you finally speak, you're not speaking to be heard. You're speaking to end something. Your words become surgical, precise, final, not noise. Execution. And that brings us to the final realization, one that separates observers from operators. Every time you choose silence, you are not backing down. You are buying time. You are watching the field, measuring momentum, tracking weaknesses, building position. While others are busy talking in Chapter 1, you are writing the ending. The world will pressure you to speak, to defend, to explain, to justify. They will call silence arrogance. They will call it avoidance. They will call it weakness. Let them, because the silent man does not live in reaction. He lives in command. And when the moment comes, when speech is no longer optional, when action must be visible, you won't speak to clarify. You'll speak to close the door, because silence wasn't your hesitation. It was your preparation. And the people who mistook it for emptiness will understand too late that it was always full. Here is the awakening most men never reach. Silence is not something you do after the moment passes. Silence is something you choose before the moment arrives. Because once emotion takes the wheel, discipline is already gone. The world trains you to speak fast, to react instantly, to explain yourself immediately. They call it honesty. They call it authenticity. They call it confidence. But Machiavelli would recognize it for what it really is: predictability. And predictability is the death of power. The man who cannot restrain his tongue cannot restrain his fate. Every word you release fixes you in place. It locks you into a position others can measure, challenge, and counter. Speech creates shape, and shape can be attacked. Silence keeps you fluid, uncatchable. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first. It denies the ego its favorite drug: expression. It forces you to sit with tension instead of releasing it through noise. It demands that you tolerate misunderstanding, judgment, and projection without correcting the record. Most people can't handle that. They speak to soothe themselves. They speak to reduce anxiety. They speak to feel in control. But control doesn't come from expression. It comes from restraint. Look back at the 9 situations you've just moved through. When you're angry, silence stops you from becoming a puppet. When you're winning, silence prevents enemies from forming. When you're betrayed, silence removes the betrayer's relevance. When you're attacked publicly, silence shifts the crown back to you. When you know the truth, silence lets your enemy destroy himself. When you're near power, silence keeps you unreadable. When you're being watched, silence turns you into a myth. When asked about your future, silence protects your momentum. Different battlefields, same weapon. Silence doesn't mean inaction. It means delayed revelation. It means you don't move on their timeline. You don't respond to their pressure. You don't speak to relieve their curiosity. You move when it benefits you. This is where most people misunderstand Machiavellian strategy. They think it's about manipulation. It's not. It's about self-mastery. Because the man who can hold his tongue when insulted, who can stay calm when angry, who can resist explaining himself when misunderstood, who can win without bragging, who can disappear without announcing it, that man is not weak. He is sovereign. Silence is the ultimate filter. It forces others to reveal themselves while you remain concealed. It lets time do the work emotion would ruin. It allows you to operate from a position of clarity instead of impulse. Think of silence like deep water. On the surface, nothing moves. Below the surface, pressure shapes stone. The loud man lives on the surface. The silent man builds depth. And depth is where power lives. This is why the world fears silence instinctively. Silence cannot be argued with. It cannot be interrupted. It cannot be cornered. It gives no handles to grab. It forces others to confront themselves. And most people hate that. So they will try to provoke you. They will try to bait you. They will try to force a reaction just to feel safe again. Don't give it to them. Every time you resist the urge to speak, you gain leverage. Every time you let silence stretch, you gain altitude. Every time you let others talk themselves into mistakes, you gain advantage. And when you finally speak, when you choose to speak, it will not be to explain your emotions. It will be to deliver a decision, a boundary, a move, an ending. Because silence doesn't make you invisible forever. It makes your appearance decisive. Machiavelli understood this final truth better than most men ever will. The loud man fights battles. The silent man chooses outcomes. So the next time you feel the urge to defend yourself, to prove yourself, to clarify your intentions, to explain your pain, pause. Ask yourself one question. Will speaking increase my power, or just relieve my emotion? If it's the second, stay silent. Let them wonder. Let them miscalculate. Let them underestimate you. Because while they are reacting to noise, you are shaping reality. The silent man is not passive. He is patient. And patience, wielded correctly, is the sharpest weapon in the room. Stay silent. Stay sharp. And when you do speak, make sure it ends the conversation forever. And understand this, silence is not something you adopt once. It is a discipline you refine for life. Because power is not loud. Power is patient. Power watches while others perform. It waits while others panic. It moves while others explain. The world is full of people trying to be seen, heard, validated, understood. They bleed their intentions into conversations. They leak their insecurities into arguments. They confess their plans before they've built the foundation. And then they wonder why they're always intercepted, copied, sabotaged, or ignored. You now know the reason. Every word is a door. Every explanation is an invitation. Every emotional reaction is a handle someone else can grab. Silence removes the handles. Silence forces others to operate in the dark. Silence shifts pressure outward. Silence turns time into your ally. This is why the calm man unnerves the room. This is why the quiet presence commands respect. This is why the one who doesn't rush to speak often decides the outcome. You don't need to announce strength. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to convince. Results speak louder than declarations. Stillness speaks louder than arguments. Absence speaks louder than rage. And when the moment comes, when speech is unavoidable, when action must surface, you won't speak from emotion. You'll speak from position. Your words will be brief, measured, final, because silence has already done the work. So remember this as you step back into the world. The man who cannot control his mouth will never control his destiny. The man who masters silence masters timing, and the man who masters timing decides who rises, who falls, and who never even sees it coming. Stay quiet, stay deliberate, stay ahead. The shadows favor those who don't announce their moves.